Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Yeah.
It's sunny out there, so good morning, everyone. Thank you. You can see it's very sunny, but I'm all dressed up for like cold winter. You must understand I'm from Singapore. So when Molly saw me just now, she was like, "Are you going skiing?" And I'm going to put on an extra pair of socks later. So as usual, today we're going to start at 8:30, and then we'll run until 10:15, 10:30 for the first session. What else? As usual, we will break for lunch and then come back at 12 o'clock for our group discussion. And Ajahn, Brahmali, and Venerable Sunyo, you can think what topic we should be discussing as you are teaching. Or you can tell me the topic during lunch later as well. Yeah. That's okay. So for those who are joining us on live streaming, please join back at 12:30, because that's when we'll start live streaming again. Then this session will go on until 2:30. So today we have Ajahn Brahmali and Venerable Sunyo. So this is the second lesson for the Early Buddhism workshop, Right Knowledge and Right Liberation. And then we have 2 more sessions to go, and that's when Bhante Sujato will be joining us. Ajahn, is that confirmed?
That is confirmed, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So as confirmed as it gets with Bhante Sujato. You never know with him, but anyway, we'll see what happens.
Okay, so fingers crossed that he's going to turn up. And Venerable Sunyo will then not be here? Is he?
I will still be here. He'll still be here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very nice. So we have 3 teachers. Yeah. How awesome is that? So make sure you don't miss the next 2 lessons. Additionally, as what I have let people know last week, we are doing a small fundraising for Bhante Sujato to cover his travel expenses here, with any extras to go into his Sutta Central. So we've got a donation box. I've also provided bank account details that you could directly donate online, so counting on your generosity. Anything else I missed? No? Okay, all right. Ajahn Brahmali, who's doing the guided meditation at 3 o'clock today?
Venerable Sunyo.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, all right. So Venerable Sunyo is going to do the guided meditation at 3 o'clock. So with that, let me hand over to the teachers. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Leha. So no, that's good. So welcome back, everyone, again. Nice to see you all here. Yeah. So we're going to carry on, of course. And this is what Ajahn Brahm says. He says, very good, carry on. So we're going to follow his advice. Very good, carry on. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So just to remind you that last time we did some of the preliminaries. We had a look at the meanings of the words like jnana, which is knowledge. Yeah, samma jnana in particular, what it actually refers to. Especially the meaning of the word, and we had a look at the idea of dependent liberation, which was Venerable Sunyo's main presentation, and then we looked at, I think very interestingly as well, the idea whether it is possible to contemplate within a jhana state. And I think we made a very strong argument that that is impossible. That was, again, Venerable Sunyo's presentation. Then towards the very end, we had a look at what it means in practice, how you actually achieve samma jnana, what it means to direct your mind and use your mind to achieve this kind of knowledge. So that's what we had a look at last time. Today, what we're going to look at is in much greater detail the content of samma jnana. What does it mean when you have right knowledge? Yeah? What is it that you actually see here? Why is it that we haven't got it already here? Yeah. And what that means is that we're going to focus on kind of the difference between samma jnana, or knowledge, as a kind of intellectual idea, and then the actual idea of samma jnana as a real insight. Because sometimes many of these things may seem true to us, but that doesn't mean we actually have the insight. There's still a gap between the intellectual knowledge and the real insight. So today we're going to look at this from many different angles, what it means to have samma jnana. I'm going to hand over to my good friend and colleague. I'm not sure are we colleagues? I'm not sure what the right word is.
Definitely friends.
Definitely friends. Venerable Sunyo, he can start this out. So please go ahead, Venerable.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Ajahn. So we'll be talking mainly about right knowledge today. And last week we had a little bit of confusion. What is right knowledge? What is the difference between right knowledge and right view? And Ajahn Brahmali and me decided that we wanted to clarify a little bit what we meant by that. So clarify the difference between right view and right knowledge. And there is this quote from the Majjhima Nikaya: there is right view that is accompanied by defilements, has attributes of good deeds, of good karmas, and ripens in attachment. And there is right view that is noble, undefiled, transcendent, a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. What this is talking about is, in the suttas, right view is talked about in two ways. One is like the right view of somebody who has not seen the Dhamma yet, but who is practicing the right path to get there. So they have views that it's good to do right things. They might have a belief in rebirth, although they may not have confirmed it yet. Those kind of things is like semi-right view, is what I called it last week. But the real right view, that is part of the Noble Eightfold Path, so the right view that is the first factor of the Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, that is the view of the stream enterer. So you can think of it like this. As like a mundane Eightfold Path, which started with like a mundane right view. This is not called that way in the suttas, but I just call it that way. Mundane right intention until mundane right samadhi. That's like the path of the non-stream winner. And then they have some sort of mundane right knowledge. And it's not really mundane because that sort of leads them to right view then. And then you get the real proper Eightfold Path, which starts with the right view of the stream winner. And then from that right view, the stream winner develops their behavior and their meditation, and then one day they will get the proper right knowledge of the fully awakened being, and then right liberation results from that. And that right knowledge is what we will talk about today. Right liberation is what we will talk about 2 weeks from now. But that is the knowledges of the Arahat, although we will also bring it back and make it a bit more pragmatic, because most of you, I suppose, might still be on the mundane path, so you're still working towards right view, and so we will talk about how to get that right view as well. But most of it we will focus on right knowledge. So this is a really deep idea. It's at the very end of the Eightfold Path. And I already noticed that we have some less attendees than in the previous workshop over here. Because concepts get deeper, you know, they get more challenging, actually. So are you ready for today?
It's also colder.
It's also colder, but inside it's kind of warm. But do you want to hear these things? Right knowledge? Okay. Ajahn Brahmali said it last week, the Buddha doesn't hold back, so you better be ready. Okay. But yeah, I want to emphasize that really quickly. We'll talk about some challenging ideas, and if you approach them too intellectually, it can be not very helpful. That's why we talked last week also about developing your samadhi. It's a very important part to getting to understand these ideas.
Do they get their money back if they don't like it? I'm not sure if there is any money involved, but
no, but money back guarantee.
Okay, coffee back guarantee.
It's up to Ajahn Sujati. The donations went to him, right?
That's true. Yeah. Actually, yeah. So that's we have nothing to lose. That's right. Okay, let's go for it. No more. No. Okay. Anyway, so let's get going then. So I can't remember what slide is next. Let's have a look. What is right knowledge? Okay, so we're going to look at the idea of right knowledge from a number of different angles. What is interesting in the suttas is that there are so many ways, if you like, or so many angles from which the contemplation can happen, and the right knowledge can arise from these various ways. We're going to look at a number, in fact 6 different ways. The first way is the way of the Four Noble Truths. And this, if you like, is the standard way in the sutras. It always says that when you reach some kind of awakening, even stream entry, what you see is the Four Noble Truths. So what does it mean to see the Four Noble Truths? Yeah, we have an idea what these things are intellectually, but what does it actually mean when you see them? How is this different from intellectual understanding? This is what we want to hone in on, to get some real idea what profound knowledge means on the Buddhist path. Four Noble Truth is like the overview. It encompasses everything else, so it's a good start point. Then we're going to have, Venerable Sunyo is going to look at dependent origination, which is another obviously very important part of these teachings, and it kind of has to do with understanding the whole process of existence itself, how existence really works. So this is also what happens when you get right knowledge. You get the direct insight into paticca samuppada. 3 insights, te-vidya. Te-vidya is a slightly different approach. This is an approach that was used by the Buddha himself. It is not really directly related to Sammanjana. It's a little bit on the side, but it's such an important part of the early Buddhist teachings and what awakening is that we want to include it here. And it certainly is jnana, it is knowledge, although it is... we'll talk about this later on when I get to it, exactly how it relates to Sammanjana. Then we have the 6 senses, or the 6 sense spheres, whatever you want to call it, sal ayatana. Okay, talata, so that you can also understand. Use that Pali word, salata. Yeah, I knew you would know that straight away. So that's the advantage of having a Buddhist education. Yeah, when you grow up, you know all of these words. Salayatana is a way of looking at experience, because all experience is found within these 6 senses. So it is a way of understanding experience. So in that way, it is a right knowledge. Then we have the 5 aggregates, panch upadana kanda. And this is another way of dividing experience into various categories. And this is the one you find in the first Noble Truth. So for that reason, a very important one. And the last one, we're going to summarize everything in terms of the 3 characteristics, the tilakkhana. The tilakkhana is how to understand the nature of reality. Yeah, so this is almost like all of the previous ones are understood in terms of these tilakkhana. So they are like almost like an overview of everything we have seen before. It's the way, it's how we contemplate things, using this as a framework for contemplation all the way throughout. Okay, so we're going to look at the Four Noble Truths. This is my job. We have assigned jobs to each other. Sometimes we had to fight it out a little bit to say, I want this one, no, I want that one. And
so then we are colleagues in the end anyway, if we do jobs together. Colleagues,
that's true.
Colleagues or
that's
friends?
That's the collegial part. Yeah. No, we don't actually fight very much. We're pretty amiable, but sometimes we may disagree slightly. That's as far as it goes. So 4 Noble Truths. Okay, let me just get straight into it. The 4 Noble Truths, Arya Satcha, in the Pali language. And again, this is the framework that is used in the suttas for all other teachings. You find in the famous Mahahatipadopama Sutta, the greatest sutta on the elephant's footprint, you find that all good teachings, all good qualities are found within the 4 Noble Truths. So it's a very important framework for understanding things. Now what is significant here is the word noble, right? The word truth also is very important, but certainly the word noble. And this can be translated in many different ways. 4 Noble Truths. As soon as I had said 4 Noble Truths, I say it's the truths of the Noble One. And so this shows you that these can be rendered in different ways. And there isn't one right way. It is as if there are many implications of these Pali words, and they're all right. They're just different angles. Just like these verses that you can see sometimes we can be interpreted in a number of different ways. In the same way, the idea is here they give a word that actually is multifaceted. So it kind of it encompasses many ideas in one go, if you like. So 4 Noble, we'll just call it that for now. And they are noble. And the word noble Very important, because it means there's something special about these truths. Yeah, you cannot expect to understand these things except if you are also noble, if you have some special kind of insight. They're not ordinary truths; they are noble truths. The world can be divided into ordinary on the one hand and noble on the other hand. And if it is noble, it is elevated. It is beyond the ordinary. So, 4 noble truths, right? Noble truth of suffering here. Now, so straight away, when we talk about noble truths, because they are special, we know that the noble truth of suffering is also not just an ordinary truth about suffering here. It is something profound. In fact, the whole point of these noble truths, the only way you can understand them is through insight. So if you try to understand noble truth of suffering by intellectual means, you can only go so far. You can only have a basic understanding. We'll see in a second what the content is, your old age, illness, and these kind of things. And it is surprising, because even things like illness and old age, yes, we have some idea why these things are suffering, but not the full idea. It's impossible to fully understand why illness is suffering unless you're an Aryan. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? And I will talk about this in a second, why that is the case. So every aspect of the first noble truth, the truth of suffering itself, every aspect of this truth can only be fully grasped if you are a noble one. And this is a very, very important point. And I have always thought that in Buddhism, we are not very good very often at how we present the Dhamma. Very often you get a number of beginners coming into the hall, and you're going to start off with the 4 noble truths, and the first thing you say is, life is suffering here. And people look at you thinking, what are you talking about? Okay, I'm leaving. Buddhism is not for me here. And the reason is because for most people it doesn't seem that way. What do you mean life is suffering? I have happiness, I have coffee, for goodness sake. How can life be suffering? Thank you very much. Anyway, I don't know who actually brought this coffee. It's very kind of you, much appreciated. So life seems like a mixture, suffering, happiness, problems, and most of the time it's not so bad, right? Yes, there is a bit of suffering, but how can you say life is suffering? Surely what you mean is life involves suffering. This is a very common interpretation of the first noble truth. Life involves suffering, and of course it's wrong. Life is suffering is the right interpretation, but it is actually very profound and incredibly hard to understand. So when we teach the Dhamma to people, we should not tell a bunch of beginners straight away the 4 noble truths. Life is suffering. We should start gently. We should say, if you behave with kindness, it makes you more happy. Okay, I can relate to that. That kind of makes sense. It's easy to understand, or relatively easy to understand. Even that is profound, but it starts you on the right track. If you become more peaceful in a meditation, you experience more contentment, more joy in your life. That people can relate to. So we need to become better marketeers, whatever it's called, of Buddhism. We need to understand, to relate it to people, to where they are at. We shouldn't take the view of the Buddha, stand really high, and then try to kind of make people understand the view of the Buddha straight away, because that's impossible. People can't grasp that. So we should really get away from this idea of presenting Buddhism from the highest point of view. If you are been born or you're part of a Buddhist culture, sure, then it will be kind of, you know these things because it's kind of, it's just part of your life. But if you come from a non-Buddhist culture, it is much more difficult to assimilate these teachings. So we need to be very careful how we present the Dhamma. So noble truth of suffering, it is a noble truth. It is not an ordinary truth. It is not something that people can be expected to understand. The noble truth of the origin of suffering, very profound. All of these are equally profound because they revolve around the same kind of insight. Why is there suffering? Because of craving, right? We know that already. What does that mean, that craving is the origin of suffering? It's actually very deep. It does not mean that when you crave, you suffer straight away or anything like that. That's not what it means. It's much more profound than that. And this is, we'll look at that in much more detail also when we come to dependent origination later on. The noble truth of the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering, right? It's the inverse of the previous one. If craving is the cause, then the end of craving must be the end. It kind of happens. Again, very profound. What does that even mean? Why do you want to end craving? Craving is delightful, isn't it? You crave, you run around in the world, you enjoy yourself. If you didn't crave, you wouldn't move anywhere. Yeah, so surely craving is important. It makes you move, it makes you kind of gather all these happy things that makes life meaningful. Otherwise, you'd just be sitting on your bottom all the time. Maybe that's the point, sitting on your bottom all the time. Isn't that what we do in meditation anyway? Yes, sitting on your bottom is undervalued in this world, right? This is kind of what it comes down to. What does Ajahn Brahm say? He has this nice saying that don't just do something, sit there. Yeah? I think that's really nice.
I heard recently that there is some kind of thing among youth nowadays which is called fear of missing out. Have you ever heard of that? Fear of missing out. But we have the joy of missing out, I heard recently.
The joy of missing out?
Joy of missing out.
JOMO.
JOMO.
Yeah, FOMO and JOMO.
Okay, yeah, something like that. I'm not exactly sure what that is about.
Yeah.
You're laughing anyway, so I suppose you understand what I'm trying to say.
JOMO, that's a good one, isn't it? I like that one. Okay, anyway, so I think the third noble truth is more like JOMO, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so good. And then we have the noble truth of the path leading to the end of suffering. This is also about insight. Understanding this path fully really happens only through insight. And we'll discuss this as well, because it's not obvious what it means to have insight into the path. So we're going to discuss this. I'm going taking too much time, is that right? Okay, I'm going to have to hurry up.
It's all right.
Is it? Okay, thank you. So, understanding the Four Noble Truths depend on stillness. And this is what we were talking about before. That stillness and knowledge always come together. And this is how it is explained in the sutras. Mendicants develop stillness, samadhi. A mendicant who has stillness truly understands. I think that is Yathabhuta Jnana, I think it is. Not sure now what the Pali is. What do they truly understand? The Four Noble Truths. This is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, etc. So here we see what we talked about before, this important connection between stillness, samadhi on the one hand, and the Four Noble Truths on the other hand. Insight, right knowledge and stillness always going together. And it's fascinating once you start to read the sutras, and you have primed to see these things because you have been told how they are everywhere. Once you are primed to see something, it starts to pop up everywhere. You are told, sometimes I have noticed with myself how I don't see certain things when I read the sutras, and then somehow I get primed to see it, and then I start to see it everywhere. And this is the same thing with the idea of the connection between stillness, samadhi, jhana, and insight. Once you know that this is an important connection, you start to see it, it pops up absolutely everywhere. So what we're seeing here, is just the same thing we have seen before, really, is the connection between samma samadhi and samma jnana, but from a slightly different way of expressing it. I just wanted to make that point because it is so pervasive in the sutras. You see it almost everywhere. It's kind of astonishing how we can miss it. It just shows you how biased everyone is. It's impossible not to have bias, and because of that, we have a problem. Okay, noble truth of suffering here. Rebirth is suffering, old age is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, association with the disliked is suffering, separation from the liked is suffering, not getting what you wish for is suffering. In brief, the 5 grasped aspects of experience are suffering here. And many of these things, again, seem kind of ordinary. Illness is suffering, okay, I get that. Separation from what is liked is suffering, I get that. Or you think you get it, of course you don't get it fully, but you get it at least a little bit. And then the last one, this is in brief, the 5 grasped aspects of experience are suffering. In other words, what that means, experience is suffering, that's really what it means. That is the one that is really, really hard to see. But again, what is important about these things is that when you talk about samma jnana, we're talking about insight into every one of these aspects. Yeah, that is such an important thing. Yeah, it's all about insight. It's about what you see when you become a stream enterer, when you gradually go through the path. These things deepen and deepen and deepen, and then there's a final kind of bang, which is the big kind of change in consciousness, which is called stream entry. The path is both gradual and sudden. And this is kind of one of those things. There's always this discussion in Buddhism about whether the path is gradual or sudden. It's kind of one of the classical controversies in Buddhism. It's always both, right? Because you're gradually moving in the right direction until you have a sudden and final insight. So both working together. So now let us look at this in a bit more detail, each one of these. Rebirth is suffering, right? What does that mean? Now, this is actually, maybe this is part of one of the most profound aspects in this particular sequence of the First Noble Truth. Because most people, we think rebirth is kind of happy. Yeah, and you can hear often in spiritual circles, you have this idea, if I get reborn, I will, I'm learning in this life, I will continue my learning experience in the next life, It's like this kind of idea that somehow rebirth, you carry on and you keep on learning until you reach some kind of ultimate consciousness or something. That's kind of a fairly common idea in spiritual circles. So rebirth is often not considered very bad, right? It's like a positive thing. And of course, that comes from this deep-seated desire to exist, the bhava tanha that you find again and again in the suttas. But actually, Buddhism is about understanding that rebirth is a problem, right? And if you contemplate it carefully, you will understand that that must be the case. And if you look at the Buddha before his awakening, he already had some idea that this was true, and that is why he was searching for an end to rebirth. He already had a feeling that this was the case, and there were people like that in ancient India who had a similar kind of feeling. And that's where we are approaching the idea of understanding that rebirth actually is problematic. It is a perpetuation of things, a going on forever with the same kind of life, same kind of problems. And when you take this to its kind of ultimate destiny, or ultimate insight, the highest kind of understanding of this, you understand that it's this kind of roaming on, with no aim, with no purpose, with no direction, not really going anywhere, sometimes going up, sometimes going down. And this has to do with the insight into non-self. There is no steering mechanism that makes this process head in any particular direction. And that is where the penny drops, that this is really, really problematic, because it's out of control. If it's out of control and you don't know where you're going to be reborn, what's going to happen to you next, it becomes unbearable. And that's where you start to understand that the whole process of rebirth is actually more like a curse than a blessing. Actually, it is a curse. I think that's the right Buddhist way of thinking about it. So this is how you gradually start to understand rebirth through the filter of non-self, through the filter of this kind of ongoing thing that doesn't have any purpose or aim. There's no goal in this. All there is just suffering kind of multiplying itself into the future. Old age is suffering. Old age is suffering is something that, again, we think we understand, because it sounds, getting old, your eyesight becomes weaker, you need glasses all the time, you get weaker, your muscles kind of waste away, and it's kind of obvious in many ways that old age is problematic. But we don't really fully grasp even this simple truth of old age. And the reason that we don't grasp it is that often it is in the future. In the future, we often put it off. We don't really bring it into the present, see it as a present reality. We don't really fully understand the problems of old age, especially when you are getting really, really older. Moreover, we think we have the agency to do something about old age. Yeah, if I just keep my body fit, if I just kind of keep going to the doctor all the time and sort things out, I will be youthful till I'm 105. Yeah, and then when I'm 106, I will die. So I only have a few months of kind of suffering towards the end. And then we look in the newspapers and we find maybe 1 in a million who is like that, right? Sometimes there are some people who must have some incredibly good karma, like some of the people at the Buddhist Society, I think. A really, really good karma. They live till they are, I don't know how old, and they are in good shape literally till they are 95 or whatever. And then we think, yeah, that's me, yeah, I'm like that, or something like that. We delude ourselves into having power over these things. This is a very important part of the problem.
You don't think it's the difference between herbal tea and coffee that makes it?
Which one makes you live longer? That's the question. Which one is it?
We'll see.
We'll
find out.
Oh, that's scary. Okay, I'll go over to water now, I think. Get those toxins out of my body. Okay, anyway. So old age can really only be understood, again, in the framework of non-self, that this is out of control, that this really is a problem, that this is inherent to human existence. You cannot actually change it. And that can only be understood by a stream enterer, at the very earliest, because only they understand the reality of non-self. That is when you understand old age fully, when you get to that point. Prior to that, we're only messing around. Illness is suffering. Same problem again. We think we are in charge of our bodies, keeping it healthy, eating well, going to the doctor when you get sick. Oh no, something has gone wrong with my body. Already you don't understand illness, right? So again, the idea that we are in charge of things, we are in denial about what is really going on. Same thing as old age. You only fully understand illness the moment you become a stream enterer. You can start to see now, right, the distinction between the ordinary right view, of kind of knowing that illness is a problem, and the more profound insight on the path, when you really understand how inherent and impossible to get rid of these things actually are. Only a stream enterer will understand that. The inherent of these things and how it is impossible to control.
And that you have to also see these things in terms of rebirth as well. It's not like you have old age once. Yeah. You get sick maybe it gets sick like millions of times.
So it kind of goes on and goes on and goes on. Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of another, and that's why rebirth comes first. And then comes old age. I reckon one way of looking at this sequence is rebirth, re-old age, re-illness, re-death, right? Because it carries on. And that's really the problem when it carries on. If there's only was one life, it wouldn't be much of an issue here. Death is suffering. And again, this is kind of obvious. Not many people are looking forward to dying. Is anyone here who's looking forward to dying? Someone maybe, it's usually, yes? Okay. Wow, okay. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So some people, does that mean you are an annihilationist or yet you are enlightened? Either you're enlightened or you're an annihilationist. Not sure which one. But some people want to be annihilated. They have had enough of this life anyway. And it is said, so good on you, those people are closer to awakening, so you are on the right tracks. That's so well done. Most people don't really look forward to death. It's something that we kind of think is always way in the future somewhere. It is not really present. It's difficult to bring it into the present. It's difficult to feel that you're going to die on your next breath. Are you ready to die on your next breath? It's hard to be ready for that, But of course, if you are an Arahat, essentially you are ready for that. You understand that death is always a possibility, regardless of when it is. So this is part of the delusion that, it is sometime in the future. Not only is it sometime in the future, but you have some control over death, right? If you do the right things, live in the right way, just like with old age and illness, it will be only when you are 110 at the earliest, that you will actually die, hopefully. That's kind of the idea. And then there is this problem that you don't only die once, but it's again and again and again. And the problem, of course, with all that with dying is that we have built up so many attachments in our life in the meantime. Attachments to people, attachment to things, attachment to our identity, and all of these things get challenged profoundly the moment you die. And so, again, it is hard to understand how difficult it can be to let go. For some people can let go, some people find it very, very hard to let go when they die. All of this happens through insight. You are not in charge of this. You're not in control. There is no self that is going through this process anyway. You pull back and you see it for what it actually is. Only then do you really understand what is happening here. Let's have a... I can't see anything anymore. It's terrible. I'm just going completely blind. Okay, 9 minutes past 9. So let's do a little bit of meditation together. Okay, everyone. So let's take some questions, a couple of questions maybe.
Ajahn, can I do the online first? Because
Yeah.
I noticed they are from US, so they might be going to bed soon.
All right, okay then. All right, yeah.
Okay. The first question is, when subtle changes / insights lead to profound, and then one has experiences or consciousness that change perception, most in the West mindset see it as detachment, philosophical, or identity crisis. So,
Yeah, so I think, Venerable, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Your turn. Yeah.
Well, stream winning is the worst identity crisis that you can ever have. So I would say yeah, but they use it, of course, in a very different way. I'm joking with it. Sometimes people try to see everything from like this intellectual lens or philosophical lens, or no, sorry, not philosophical, like a psychological lens. They have these psychological terms like identity crisis and stuff, and then they hear certain teachings from Buddhism, and I think, oh, that's what it must be. But it's not like that. I don't know what more I can say about that. If you have like an identity crisis in like the psychological sense, then you're actually not seeing reality as it really is. But whereas when you're a stream winner, then you actually do. So although I made a joke that it's the worst identity crisis that you can have.
It's the best one as well.
It's it's actually not an identity crisis in the psychological sense of the word. It's actually seeing things as they really are. Yeah.
yep.
Just to add, I think the problem is that we don't understand these things again, what these things actually mean. And of course, if you do have this kind of insight, it is the opposite of an identity crisis, because identity crisis only happens if you have an identity. If you haven't got that identity at all, then it's kind of no problem. That's what you see at this particular point. There is no identity. So actually all identity crises end at this point. And that's really the part of this insight.
Okay, next question. What is the relation between the 4 satipatthanas after samadhi and samaniyana? Are the 4 satipatthanas after samadhi the map for the insights of samaniyana?
Well, we talked about that in previous workshops a lot, but a very short summary. In general, the 4 satipatthanas in the suttas, they are meant to develop samadhi. And then from the samadhi, you get the insights. So from samadhi, you get either right view or right knowledge. So that's the general, how it's put 95% of the time. But sometimes it also talks about using like further satipatthana after the jhanas, which is like a contemplation. But generally, satipatthana leads up to samadhi, and then samadhi up to right view. Yeah. That's why in the Eightfold Path, you have right mindfulness before, right samadhi, and then the right jnana, the right knowledge comes afterwards.
Okay. And I think I should provide a little bit of justification as to why the attendance is lower today, Ajahn and Venerable. It's because we have a strong competitor who is running a retreat right now. So we've lost some people there. We can't fight that competitor, unfortunately. Questions from the floor?
Good morning, Ajahn Pandey.
Good morning.
With regard to the statement of suffering you have on the screen there, all but the last one, generally we would understand as suffering, right? So rebirth, whatever, we would see an aspect of suffering in every single one of those. But then the Buddha says at the last one, in summary, the 5 khandhas are suffering. Now, given the 5 khandhas are always in existence in our experience, would that mean that every one of the previous ones we're always experiencing?
Well, the way I read this, when it says rebirth is suffering, old age, blah, 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 death is suffering, that basically is saying life is suffering. Even the word jati, that we translate here as rebirth, in Pali also can mean life more generally, actually. So you could also read the first one as life is suffering, actually. Jati, for example, when the Buddha recollects his past lives, we say recollect past lives, but he says, I recollect my past births. But that actually means the whole life. So when it says here, rebirth is suffering until death is suffering, actually means life is suffering. So in brief, the 5 khandhas are suffering is also saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that when it says in brief, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is just a summary of what happened before. I think it is also just it may actually be more than what you see before. It's just a kind of it's a summary of the whole thing. But it may actually include other sufferings that are not also expressed in the previous ones as well. For example, if you talk about the jhana states as suffering, they're not usually called suffering in the suttas. Or are they? They're called, I can't remember exactly what they're called, but there's obviously a degree there too of unsatisfactoriness or whatever.
Yeah, they're called suffering as well.
They're called suffering as well, okay, yeah. And that they would probably not usually be included, except maybe, as Venerable Sunyo says, in life is suffering. So I think the last one is encompasses all the previous one and may also add a little bit to them as well. Actually, yeah. Okay, let's come back to our joyful contemplation of the Dhamma. Death is suffering.
I enjoyed it actually.
Well, this is the thing. The thing is that this. If you understand what is going on, these are actually joyful things, and that is what is so weird about it, and that is why it is hard for ordinary people to understand. Yeah, these insights into these things are incredibly joyful, and that's kind of the point here. Okay, association with the disliked is suffering. Separation from the liked is suffering. Not getting what you wish for is suffering. These are, in large part, the same thing. Yeah, life is full of this. Association with the disliked. It happens all the time. You are hearing things, seeing things that you don't want. Separation from the liked. Yeah, you desire things, but you can't get them. Of course, some of the most important ways in which you are separated from what you liked is when someone very close to you, loved ones, die, for example. These are the kind of very big separation from the liked. But they go down to very small things as well, tiny things in ordinary life. Not getting what you wish for is suffering. Oh, may I carry on living forever, or whatever. You're not going to get that. Wishing doesn't get you there. Even practicing spiritual path doesn't get you there. Nothing gets you there. So again, the idea here is that we tend to think that we have a sense of control of our lives. We can increase the association with the liked, decrease the association with the disliked. We can get more things that we wish for. We think that we can control life, and this is why we never really give up. This is why we always go for another relationship. This is why we always go for more fun, more travel, more entertainment, more of everything, because we actually do believe that it is possible to control this in one way. And again, the idea here is that these are inseparable from life itself. This life is always going to be like this, and that full insight into that, again, is only to be understood or to be found or to be had once you see non-self, because that gives rise to a understanding that these things are actually out of control. There's nothing much you can do about these things, and then it carries on again and again from life to life to life after life, always trying to control these things, never succeeding, roaming around aimlessly, pointlessly in samsara, without goal, without purpose, not actually achieving what you believe deludedly you're going to achieve. Last one. In brief, the 5 grasp aspects of experience are suffering. So these are the Panchupadana Khandha, and often translates are the 5 grasping aggregates. But I think we need to translate it in a way, at least we do it here, which is easier to understand. So when we talk about the khandhas, we're talking about experience. Experience is what life feels like from inside of each one of us. We experience the world. And this experience can be divided into 5 aspects. And these aspects are the form aspect, the feeling, or the sensation aspect, perception, will, and consciousness. Why is it divided into these 5 aspects? And the reason is because these are the aspects we tend to grasp onto as me or mine. Yeah, this is what I am, or this belongs to me. And that's why these are focused on by the Buddha. And so what the Buddha is saying here is that anything in the world that you take to be mine, or anything in the world that you experience at the end of the day, all of that is suffering. Yeah? That is really profound. Yeah, it's really, really profound. And because it's something that it's almost impossible to relate to, because we don't tend to think of life like that at all. And so the reason again for that is because the sense of self gets involved. The sense of self says that as long as that is there will be a certain value to experience, because the sense of self has value to you. And because it has value to you, it is impossible to see everything as suffering, because that blocks. The value is kind of counteracts the ability to see things as suffering. So once you see non-self, that is also the time when you're able to see things as suffering in the right way. This is the difference between ordinary view and the profound right view of the Dhamma. You have to remove the sense of self, because that gives a false sense of value to experience and to reality. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit faster now, because time is always too short. Why we never set aside enough time for these workshops? We should actually have the workshop going on until everyone is enlightened. That's kind of the ideal workshop. Carry on and on. Okay, and maybe that's overdoing it a bit. Anyway, noble truth of the origin of suffering is the craving that leads to future lives, mixed up with relishing and greed, chasing pleasures in various realms. That is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving to continue existence, and craving to end existence. So this is the second noble truth. It's about the origin of suffering. And you can see here, it is the craving. That is the origin here. Now, a very important point about this craving, it is often thought, or often said, that this craving is suffering, because when you crave, you suffer, right? So whenever you crave, and that's why craving is the origin of suffering. But actually that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Because if you suffer when you crave, that means it belongs to the first noble truth, because that means that craving is suffering. And so that is really equivalent to the idea of being associated with what you don't like, or being dissociated with what you like, not getting what you want. That is what that is. That belongs to the first noble truth. Here it must mean something else. Craving is the cause of suffering. And what it means is this. I'm going to very briefly analyze this noble truth to pick out the most significant aspects of this truth, and then show how that relates to dependent origination. This is kind of really interesting, because it gives you an insight into the core factors of dependent origination. A problem with dependent origination is that it is presented in so many different ways in the suttas, sometimes having 5 factors, sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 12. And sometimes the question is, when are we dealing with dependent origination and when are we not? Now this gives you the key to understanding this, and this is why it is so interesting. So we're dealing with the noble truth of the origin of suffering. So suffering is a key word. It is the craving that leads to future lives. These are 2 other key words. The craving is the source that leads to suffering, but it leads to suffering in a particular way, through the process of rebirth. That is the way that it leads to suffering. And what I will show you is that these are the 3 critical terms in the second noble truth, and these are the source of the whole process of dependent origination. So only when these 3 terms are included, either directly or indirectly, are we dealing with dependent origination. If either of these are missing, we're not dealing with dependent origination. Very, very useful to know, because it makes it straight away, you have a very good interpretive tool for deciding what is and what is not dependent origination in the suttas. Mixed up with relishing and greed it doesn't really add much. It doesn't give any new information. It just gives a way of thinking about craving. Relishing and greed are just aspects of craving. It doesn't add to the 3 previous terms. Chasing pleasure in the various realms is also just another way of talking about craving. It doesn't really add any detailed information as to the process. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving to continue existence, and craving to end existence. Just another way of expanding on the idea of craving. So we have 3 critical terms. Craving, leading to future lives, which then is basically what suffering is all about. These are the 3 things. And this is the core 3 terms that you need to understand dependent origination. This is what dependent origination is about. But of course, it expands on this, and that's what makes it interesting here. And I'm going to leave that to Venerable Sunyo to explain that in more detail later on. So that is the second noble truth. The second noble truth is the insight into how craving perpetuates existence. You can imagine this is getting pretty profound. How is that even possible to see that? And this is what the Buddha says can be seen through insight. Noble truth of the end of suffering. This is just the reverse of the previous one. The fading away and cessation of that very same craving, specifically that craving, not any other craving, with nothing left over, giving it away, letting it go, releasing it and not clinging to it. So it's the complete, utter ending of that craving. And you will notice it's a very specific kind of craving. It's the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving to exist, and the craving to not exist. It is not the craving to help other people. That's different. The Buddha helped other people for a long time. Did the Buddha have craving? I don't know if craving is the right word, but he certainly had some sort of desire. Otherwise he would never be moved. He would never do anything. I don't think I can call it craving. I think the word craving is chosen very carefully in the suttas. Tanha in Pali, right? Tanha means thirst. And the idea of thirst in English really means a very strong kind of desire. And that is why craving, I think, is a suitable translation. So does the Buddha have that kind of craving? No. Does he have some subtle desires to drive him? Yes. And so that's why we need to distinguish very clearly what we mean by desire in the suttas. So this is really just a following up of the previous one. But it is very interesting because the ending of craving, the majority of people in the world, how do they feel about the ending of craving? Does life sound even remotely interesting if there is no desire or craving? Most people say, I don't want that, thank you very much. I like my craving. Craving is good, it's enjoyable, you do things. That's why you enjoy the world. Not only that, but we identify with the craving, because the craving is what allows us to do things in the world. And we identify with doing. We enjoy creativity, we enjoy making things and all of these kind of things. And it's because we identify with the craving, and because we think craving is what gives life meaning in a certain way, the ending of craving sounds like suffering. Actually, it is happiness. And this is why this is so profound again. And you can really only understand it through this kind of insight that has to do with non-self. Because at the moment you have non-self, you know that the whole idea of doing and craving has nothing to do with any inherent existence. It's a process that just drives itself, and then it becomes meaningless at that point. Noble truth of the path leading to the end of suffering here. It is simply this noble eightfold path. That is right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right stillness. It is just this noble eightfold path. In other words, is nothing more. Ayang eva. Eva is a short little word, and it may not have much significance, but it may have a little bit of significance in the idea that this is all there is to it. You don't need anything more than this noble eightfold path. Just this noble eightfold path. Now, how can we have insight into the path? Maybe the previous ones, kind of make sense. You can have insight into suffering. That kind of is understandable. Craving, yes, because these are experiential things. But what about the path? How is it possible to have insight into the path itself? And I think the critical thing here that we need to understand is the connection between stillness and insight. If you understand why stillness is important, then everything else falls into place. So stillness is important, as we have seen before, for a large number of reasons, right? But one of them is that you need a very, very high degree of purity of mind. You need to have the mind completely pure to be able to see reality as it actually is. If the mind is not fully purified, then the mind will be biased. You cannot see things clearly. And that purity is only achieved when you get to samma samadhi. That's when that purity is stable. The defilements cannot arise. There are many other reasons why right stillness is important. It is the data that you have, what you see. It is the power of the mind that comes from that. But the reason I'm focusing on purity now is because all the factors before are the factors that drive that purity of the mind. Yeah, you're gradually reducing the defilements of the mind until you achieve the highest purity. So once you understand that that purity is required, all the other factors make sense because they are the factors that lead to that purity, starting with the morality factors, the right intention first of all, then the effort, and then the meditation practice that takes you all the way to the highest kind of purity, and that gives the insight into that path. So this is really how you can see the Noble Path directly, by understanding that stillness is an absolute requirement for insight in this way here. So, now I'm going to hand over to Venerable Sunyo again. Should we take a short break before you move on, Venerable Sunyo? Or do you want to carry on straight away here?
What do people want?
Let's take a short break. You get a bit of freshness. We get a bit of time to digest maybe, and then we can carry on until the meal with the next one. Okay, so maybe let's take one or two questions that are closely related to what we're talking about. If anyone wishes to ask anything. No one urgently? Okay.
Bill has a question.
Bill, yeah.
Yes. Isn't, going back to the First Noble Truth, isn't getting what you want also suffering?
Is getting what you want suffering? Yeah. I would say that it is not usually considered suffering because this is what everyone is trying to achieve, right? So it's considered kind of a thing. But I think maybe from a getting what you want, is that suffering? Yeah. And what are you thinking of in particular here?
Well, as soon as you want something and you get it, then you'll want something else.
Right, yeah, but exactly. So the problem is that not that getting what you want is suffering, is that it is probably not as satisfying as you thought it was, right? And then you have to kind of do more. So, yeah. So there is some truth to that.
Ajahn, there was a very similar question online from Indira Fernando. She said, Ajahn Brahm explains the second noble truth as wanting. Any form of wanting is itself suffering.
Yeah, so that the idea there is that the movement of the mind is suffering, right? The idea is that because the mind moves, because the mind isn't still, that is actually a kind of displeasure in the mind right there. And that's why any kind of wanting is suffering. It is also, of course, a suffering because it is a separation from where you want to be. So any kind of wanting is suffering. But what that means is that some degree of suffering is actually part of the path. Yeah, so suffering is part of the path. Without that suffering, you can't reach the end of the path because you need to have that desire to practice the path. And so some suffering is going to be part of the path. So so it's true, but it's also about context and the situation here.
Yeah, and it also comes back down to what we started with, that sometimes we have to dumb down these teachings a little bit to make it more relatable to people. So sometimes we just teach, okay, second noble truth, craving is suffering, but the deeper truth is that it's the craving that leads to rebirth, that is the origin of suffering. So I'll come back to that in a moment as well.
Yeah. I suggest we carry on
I think
because
so
we have
too.
more.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for those questions. So now we'll be talking about dependent origination, and also implied is cessation of those things that are dependently originated. We gave a whole workshop about this before, and that was actually 17 parts I checked. So if you want more information, look at that. But I will give a little bit of a brief overview of this, and especially how it relates to the insight of the fully enlightened one, because we are talking about right knowledge, which is the knowledge of the enlightened one. I will also talk a little bit with how that differs from the view of the stream winner, the right view. But before I do that, I will show you how dependent origination is an expansion of the second noble truth. We usually prepare our parts of these workshops separately, and then we just put it together, and then we teach. And this time we had very similar ideas about connecting the second noble truth to dependent origination, so I'll be repeating a little bit what Ajahn Brahmali mentioned before, but in a different translation and maybe a different angle as well. So this is my translation of the second truth. Not second noble truth, because I call it, this is the truth seen by the noble one, Arya Satya, of the origin of suffering. It is the craving that leads to a next life or to future lives, which, along with enjoyment and desire, looks for happiness in all sorts of realms. And the point here is that it's not just any type of craving which leads to suffering. It's specifically the craving that leads to rebirth, which is the real cause of suffering. If you are craving right now for lunch or for this workshop to be over or whatever, and tomorrow you become enlightened, then that craving you had today was not the cause of suffering in terms of the second noble truth. Because it's only when you create rebirth that you sort of create more suffering at that instant. I see lots of people looking a bit confused. But that is what the Buddha actually says. We often thought that craving is the cause of suffering because it causes you restlessness and such, and that is all true. But that is a little bit of a dumbing down of what the Buddha actually was talking about. And I will teach that way myself as well, because you have to make it relatable. But when the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths, or the truth seen by the Noble Ones, the idea is deeper. It's about craving leading to rebirth. That is how you create suffering. If you're reborn, you create more suffering. And the implication is that once you are reborn, suffering is inevitable until you pass away again. So, the second Noble Truth really tells us that craving leads to a next life or rebirth, and then you have suffering as an automatic consequence once you are reborn. Yeah? And we will talk about this as well next week, that it's not just the craving that is suffering, that is also just life itself that is suffering. And it's not just grasping the aggregates that is suffering, or the aspects of existence that is suffering. The aspects of existence themselves are the suffering as well. So that's what we'll talk about next week. Now I just want to show you how this second Noble Truth can be expanded, and that leads us to the teachings of dependent origination, or dependent arising. Different ways of translating the same word. And this is a teaching by Sariputta, quite famous, at least the start of it. The Buddha said, if you see the dependent arising of things, or if you see dependent origination, you see the Dhamma. If you see the Dhamma, you see the dependent arising of things. And what has dependently arisen are these 5 taken up aspects of existence. Taken up is my translation for upadana. And wanting them and holding on to them, being attracted and attached to them, will make suffering originate. So here we sort of have the same idea. If you want these experiences, these 5 aspects of existence, then that leads to the origination of these khandhas, these aspects of existence. And that really means, in this context, means rebirth. Yeah? When you are reborn, they originate again, these 5 aspects of existence. So here, Sariputta gives a sort of brief version of dependent arising, or dependent origination, and it basically just gives us the second Noble Truth again, with a little bit more detail about putting in the taken up aspects of existence, the upadana khandhas, and instead of craving we have wanting, but it's the same idea. Do you see that? Anybody sees it's the same idea? Who doesn't understand that what I'm saying, that this is the same idea as the second Noble Truth? Please put your hand up. Bram? Still some people don't see it. I thought so. Sometimes I have to, just the look in your eyes, I see whether I'm making sense or not. So, the second Noble Truth says, craving that leads to rebirth, then you get suffering. Yeah? Now this, the Sariputta is saying, wanting the aspects of existence, or wanting life, you could say, will make suffering originate, and that origination, he's referring to rebirth, yeah? As well. The origination of the khandhas is the origination of life, that is rebirth. So here Sariputta is also saying the same thing. And the reason I'm including this quote here is because when we think about dependent origination, many people who are familiar with Buddhism will immediately think of the 12 links. But here Sariputta explains it much more succinct, much more briefly. Just as wanting leads to origination of khandhas, leads to suffering. Yeah? So these 12 factors are just an expansion of these ideas. And I want to not spend today explaining all those 12 factors again. You're probably familiar with the 12 factors of dependent arising. And I don't want to explain them all today because we did a whole workshop on that already. But I will briefly, very briefly show you how they are linked to the second Noble Truth as well. So how are the 12 factors of dependent origination, from ignorance all up to suffering, how they are related to the second noble truth. And I have a little table here. It's a lot of information at once, but just look at the right here. You see the second truth, or the second truth seen by the noble one that we've just discussed. It's craving, leading to a next life, punabhava, or re-existence, literally. And then you get suffering as a result. So we have the cause of rebirth, is craving. Then we have rebirth, or punabhava. And then we have suffering. That is what the factors that we pointed out in the second noble truth. Remember those? Yeah? Now, if we expand our red box a bit, and we put in part of these teachings on dependent arising, you see there the factors craving, taking up, continued existence, which is also bhava, basically the same as punabhava. And then we have birth, and then suffering. This is just an expansion of the same ideas of the second noble truth. I hope you can sort of see that. Yeah, it starts with craving, and it ends in suffering, and somewhere in between is rebirth, but it just has a little more details on how that process works. It also includes upadana, the fuel or taking up. And now we can look at all the 12 factors, and without going into detail, is basically the other factors also talk generally about the same idea, but from a different angle. Now they talk about how ignorance leads to karma, basically, and that also leads to rebirth, and then to suffering. So those are also an expansion, in a way, of the second noble truth. You just look at it from a different angle. And I will not explain all these 12 factors today, as I said. I hope you don't mind, because we'll be here, we won't have time for lunch then. So you have to set your preferences, you know.
That's renunciation, you know, that's really...
Yeah, but also dissociation from the light.
Is it?
I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So you see there below the table, it says 2 parallel sequences independent arising. So from ignorance to sensations is sort of parallel to craving to suffering. And if you want more detail, I actually wrote a little book, and with Ajahn Brahm's blessing, we will be publishing this, and I made it together with the people from Wisdom and Wonders, and the website is BSWA.org, and we are planning to print it, so if you want to help out, and you can contact them on that website, and one day we will publish this book, and I will explain especially the factors about consciousness and the nama rupa and stuff. Not today, though. Today, I will want to focus on one discourse in the Nidana Samyutta called the Discourse on the Foolish and the Wise. There's also a sutta by this name in the Majjhima Nikaya, but this is a different one. If you are familiar with the suttas, you see this is from Samyutta Nikaya 12.90. But 12 is the Nidana Samyutta. Those are all the suttas on dependent arising or dependent origination. And so this is a sutta which talks about dependent origination. And it sort of gives you everything you need to know to understand the Dhamma, if you have deep insight. But from another perspective. It does not use the 12 factors of dependent arising, but it gives you the same ideas. Everybody okay with that? For me to talk about it that way? All right. So this is the Buddha talking. The current body of the fool, so current body, you know, your physical body of any kind of fool. And a fool here is anybody who is not an Arahat, anybody who is not fully enlightened. So if you are not fully enlightened, then you're a fool, basically. That's what the Buddha is saying. I don't know if the word bala is actually fool in that way, but anyway. The current body of the fool has originated by them having been blinded by ignorance. Remember, Ananda, that was your suggestion a long time ago, blinded by ignorance, and chained by craving. Yeah, blinded by ignorance and chained by craving. If I go back to that table, you see at the top, you have ignorance and craving. So those are the two main driving forces for rebirth. Current body of the fool has originated by them having been blinded by ignorance and chained by craving in the past life. Yeah, they had craving and ignorance in the past life, and that's why they were reborn now. And now there are just the six senses that they experience, and when impinged by sense impressions, phassa or contact, at one of them, the fool feels pleasure and pain. Basically what this is saying, the fool was reborn because of their craving, and now they are reborn, they experience these six senses, and because of these six senses, they're suffering. Yeah? Pleasure and pain. Pleasure is also suffering, and the word for pain is actually dukkha. So, do you get the idea? The fool was reborn because of their craving and ignorance, and now they have six senses, so they suffer. That's the idea. Okay? So we were all fools in a past life, that's why we're here. Yeah? And now the idea is that we should not be fools again. Now, the Buddha continues, the current body of the wise person, of the enlightened one, is what it means in this context, has also originated by them having been blinded by ignorance and chained by craving. There are just the six senses, and when impinged by sense impressions or contact, at one of them, the wise person also feels pleasure and pain. What then is the difference between the foolish and the wise? So, the fully enlightened person was also in a past life craving and was attached to things, had also ignorance, not fully understanding life. And because of that, they also now have these six senses. Yeah, they're also reborn. They have this body, which has the six senses. And therefore they also have phassa or contact. They still have sense impressions, right? They still experience things. So not all factors of dependent origination has ceased yet, because they still have this sense impressions, which is one of the factors. So now the Buddha said, yeah, the wise person also had craving, and they still also suffer. So what's the difference then between the foolish and the wise? Yeah, what's the difference? That's the pop quiz for today. What is the difference between the foolish and the wise? What would your answer be? Sorry? They're not grasping. The wise, I suppose, yeah? Yeah. So basically they're not having that craving anymore. Right. And because of that, what will happen? No more rebirth. Right. Let's see if the Buddha actually gave the same answer, or if you're right or wrong. The Buddha then said, the current body of the fool has originated by them being blinded by ignorance and chained by craving, and they have not abandoned that ignorance. Ananda, you said, and not fully ended that craving. So the fool was a fool in a past life and is still a fool right now, basically. So they have not ended that. Why? Because they have not lived the holy life or the eightfold path for the complete ending of suffering. Therefore, after their body breaks down, the fool will travel on to another body. Traveling on to another body, they won't get liberated from birth, old age and death, sorrow, grief, pain, sadness and distress. They won't get liberated from suffering, I tell you. So, exactly, the fool has not ended craving, so they will be reborn again. Now the wise person. The current body of the wise person has also originated by them being blinded by ignorance and chained by craving in a past life. But they have abandoned that ignorance and fully ended that craving. They abandoned ignorance. This is just another way of saying that they have right knowledge. And you abandon ignorance, then in place of that you get right knowledge. You didn't know what life was like. You were missing some insights. You didn't have the full knowledge yet when you were a fool. But as a fully enlightened one, you see how life is. And therefore, because you see that life is problematic, you also end craving. Yeah, you see that it is full of suffering, so you don't want to be reborn anymore. You'll know that it only creates more suffering if you get reborn, and therefore your craving will end. Yeah? Intellectually, you're probably all nodding, but these things go very deep. Why is that? Because they have lived the holy life for the complete ending of suffering. So they did practice the Noble Eightfold Path right until the very end. Therefore, after their body breaks down, the wise will not travel onto another body. They won't get reborn. Not traveling onto another body, they get liberated from birth, old age and death, sorrow, pain, sadness and distress. They get liberated from suffering, I tell you. Of course, they still get old, probably in their last life. They still have death in their last life. They still have pain in their last life. So they're not liberated from suffering yet. But when they finally pass away and don't get reborn anymore, then suffering will come to an end. Now, I've made in blue that they have abandoned ignorance and fully ended craving. And that is one knowledge of the fully enlightened being. And the other knowledge I put in green, they get liberated from birth. And this is not just something they somehow infer or guess, like, yeah, I suppose I won't get reborn again. No, they fully know that they won't get reborn again. And this is how right knowledge of the enlightened one differs from the right view of the stream winner. The stream winner has also seen dependent origination. And when we gave the last workshops, 2 years ago, maybe or more already, we talked mainly about dependent origination from the perspective of stream winning. And stream winners, they also know that craving will lead to rebirth. And they also know that one day, not very long in the future, in the wide scope of samsara, they will also get liberated from birth and suffering. They know that it's not going to last much longer. But the Arahat knows that it is going to be after this life that suffering ends. Yeah? So the stream winner might have a couple more rebirths, and then it's over and done with. The Arahat knows that it is one more, only this last life, and then it's all over and done. All suffering ends. Yes, very good. And that is really nice knowledge to have. I suppose to know that this is almost over. Just one more life, and then it's done. Happy with that, Ajahn? Okay.
Very happy.
If you have anything to add, just jump in. Now, I want to emphasize that this knowledge of the fully enlightened being, this insight into dependent arising is really, they understand not just how dependent arising works, but also that dependent cessation, the cessation of all those factors, has also basically been achieved. When they pass away, all suffering will end. And that is really the insight of the enlightened one into dependent arising and cessation, that they were reborn in the past, but there will no longer be rebirth. That is the core insight. There's also, of course, insights into anatta, into anicca. Those are all connected to this. But I want to emphasize this aspect of rebirth because, well, that is really what is the liberating aspect of it, really. And also because sometimes people interpret dependent arising in quite a different way than we do, and then it becomes like a momentary process or something. But that is not really what the Buddha was talking about. So I will point that out. This is a nice quote. It's the Buddha talking. I, being subject to rebirth, and seeing the problem with that, or sometimes translated the danger with that, adinava, sought the ultimate relief from the yoke, from the burden, basically. The yoke is like this thing that the oxen carry, and it sort of metaphorically represents just suffering. Ultimate relief from suffering, you could say. Extinguishment, nibbana, which is free from birth. And I found it. So it's basically the Buddha saying that he was enlightened and he knew that how to end birth. I, being subject to aging, sickness, and death, and seeing the problems with that, sought the ultimate relief from the yoke, from suffering. Extinguishment, which is free from aging, free from sickness, free from death. Okay. And these terms, ajata and amata, we will discuss next week how they mean freedom from birth and not the unborn or something. Yeah. In case you are familiar with those kind of translations. In a way, let me not talk about that today. I knew and saw knowledge, that's what we're talking about. I knew and saw. He didn't just know it intellectually, he really saw it. It's not really an inference, it's just he really knew this. That my liberation is irreversible. Basically meaning craving has ended and it cannot come back. Because you've seen the truth and you cannot unsee reality. It's the same for the stream winner in a smaller way. They've also seen something that they cannot unsee. So it's not up to them anymore whether they stay in samsara or not. They cannot choose to stay in samsara. They will have to get out at some point because they've seen the problems with that. As it translates here, seeing the problem with that. But the enlightened ones have fully understood the problem, and the stream winner sort of has seen it, but sort of keeps ignoring it a little bit. Like maybe what I saw is not really true. Still their attachments come back, but eventually their right view will take over, and they will also reach liberation, just like the Buddha. So he knew the liberation is irreversible, that ignorance has ended, and then that craving will not come back. And he also knew that this is my last life, and there won't be another. It's just the same thing as the discourse of the foolish and the wise, that there won't be another life. That's what the enlightened ones know. That must be kind of nice. So, that is what, to me, is the core insight of the enlightened one into dependent cessation.
Quote from the Sutta is kind of nice.
Kind of nice, yes. No, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes there's creative translations of the Sutta, so I can probably find some Pali evidence for that somewhere.
Easy. Of course we can,
Kind of really nice. Yeah. I'll talk a bit about the absence of a self in the last workshop. That's also a very important part of all these insights. But I now focus just on the rebirth aspect of it. But these are all connected. When we give these teachings, everything is sort of implied in other things. Yeah. Now, another sutta. Mendicants or bhikkhus. Form, cessation, is Vedana, or feeling. Perception, will, and consciousness burn. And these are the 5 aspects of existence, and they burn because they're suffering. As a learned noble disciple, when you see this, you get disillusioned with these things. Being disillusioned, you lose desire. By losing desire, the minds get liberated. When liberated, you will know it. That's jnana. Vimuttang miti jnanang hoti. There is the knowledge that you're liberated, that the mind is liberated. Yeah, so this is really the right knowledge. And when first it says, as a learned noble disciple, when you see this, what does that refer to, you think? Does that mean full enlightenment or stream winning? I heard some people muttering stream winning. Most people are sort of hesitant to answer. But as a noble disciple, when you see this, that is stream winning. And then you get disillusioned with all these things, and then being disillusioned, you lose desire. Losing desire gets liberated. So disillusionment, losing desire, that is sort of a summary of the path of the noble ones. And when they finally lost all desire, then their mind is liberated from craving and from ignorance. And then they will know it. Yeah, so it's not like, I think I'm an Arahat, maybe. Yeah, I kind of feel like it, you know. No, they know it. It's just that they look at things really differently. You will understand that rebirth has ended. Same idea again. That the holy life is finished, that the work is done, that it's irreversible, and ignorance has ended. There's nothing more to do. All your defilements are gone. So there won't be another life. Yeah? Naparang itatayati. There will not be another rebirth. This is the knowledge of the enlightened one. So in all these teachings, again, you see the connection between stream winning and then the practice they have to do, and then the insights. And all these, the final insights of the Arahat. And all the suttas detail this from different angles. Always the same ideas, though. So the suttas are so wonderful if you see these kind of things. Like, it's really brilliant text, isn't it, Ajahn? Yeah. Like, and they survive for such a long time. It's like really, really amazing. Yeah. Now, of course, you'll probably have recognized part of our Buddha stupa of needs that I talked about last week. Yeah, seeing things as they really are leads to disillusionment, leads to losing desire, and leads to knowledge and liberation. So this is also at the very high end of the pyramid. Yeah. So maybe not all of you can relate to that yet, but one day you see things as they really are, and then you start reflecting on these teachings, and they become even more powerful than they already are. Now, one more is a fully enlightened one by the name of Samidatta. Sort of sums this all up in a way that I find kind of nice. It's in the Theragatha, one of the verses spoken there. I fully understand the 5 aspects of existence. They still exist, but their roots are cut off. Transmigration through birth is over. Now there won't be a next life. You fully understand, this is the samajnana, the right knowledge, not just understanding them in a preliminary way of the stream winner, but no, fully understanding them.
What is the Pali word there, do you know?
Parinya.
Is it parinya?
I think so.
Parinya.
I believe so. It's been a while since I translated this.
That's usually, yeah. Okay. Parijanati.
I suppose so, yeah. Yeah. The 5 aspects of existence, so I basically understand life. They still exist, so as said before, the current body of the enlightened one is still there. The 6 senses are still there. The 5 aspects of existence are still there. Suffering is still there for now, but their roots are cut off. And what are the roots? Craving, yes, and ignorance as well. So the roots for these things are craving and ignorance, and the enlightened one knows that those don't longer exist. Therefore, transmigration through birth is over, and there won't be a next life. That is really the liberating knowledge that they have. And now, from knowledge so there's 2 knowledges: that there is no more causes for rebirth, and also the connected knowledge to that there won't be any rebirth. At least that's 2 knowledges I focused on right now. Yeah, and that also leads to 2 types of liberation, which we'll speak about in the 5th or the 4th workshop. The liberation from craving, which is one kind of liberation, and then another liberation is the liberation from suffering when they finally pass away. This is also the 2 types of nibbana, the extinguishment of craving and the extinguishment of existence. We will detail this all later. Yeah. So that is the insight of the fully enlightened one into dependent arising and dependent cessation. Kind of high ideas, but it's all over the suttas, so not nice to have some understanding of that. Kind of nice. Ajahn.
No, that's wonderful. Great, thank you. Is that the end of the dependent origination?
Yes.
Maybe you should ask some questions maybe before we break for lunch.
Maybe some questions. Yeah. And then I don't know if you still have time for your bit.
We can do that. I think we can do things later on as well. Be fine. Yeah.
Thank you for this is such a beautiful teaching to be able to hear these words. And I have a question just about somehow the understanding of craving and existence in my own experience. And I didn't really find and do a retreat and find the Buddhist path until I was probably 30 and started to hear the teachings. But I remember when I was about 19 and 20, talking to friends about they were wanting to have children and wanting to lead this sort of life. And I can remember saying, but it's all really conditioned, and I won't do that because it brings so much suffering. And I didn't really have the words at that time to explain it, but it was a sort of a deep knowing, and took another 10 years to find some of these teachings. Is that sort of just like a direct insight? It was sort of not intellectual, it was more this deep knowing of just, this is craving, this is going to lead to a lot of suffering. I don't know if you can make a comment on that.
Oh, well, insight comes on various different levels. Yeah. And some insights are intellectual, some insights are a bit more on the emotional level, which is what you're talking about. And then there is the real life transforming insights of stream winners when they really understand all these things in a very, very deep level, which goes beyond that still. Yeah. So sounds like you had some good, good intuitions. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
And yet it makes it very difficult because you're going against the society, in a sense, to make some of these decisions. So it's quite hard to really believe in those things at those times.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, I can fully relate to that when I was in university.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think many of these things, they're often things that come from past lives. That you already have some insight, understanding from the past. You bring it into this existence, and then the intuition is there when you come into this life. And this is, precisely, it is hard to believe in it. And this is why the idea of Kalyanamitta is so important. We have all of this. Very often the wisdom is already there. It's kind of buried somewhere inside of us. But we not have enough self-confidence to go with it unless we have some support. When you have that support, and the Buddha says that your intuition is right, then you really start to believe in your intuitions. Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why Kalyanamitta is so important, because it helps us to support us in what we actually deep down have a sense of is right already. And then the Buddha tells us additional things beyond our intuition. Yeah. And because you already have some confidence, you go with it, and it takes you even further, which gets very, very exciting. And this is what this workshop really is about: that excitement.
I've got a question in regards to suffering, why the Four Noble Truths have suffering as the main characteristic rather than impermanence or non-self, is that when you actually have suffering, you, even at the very basic level, you do want to put an end to it. So because it is very, automatic that if you have suffering, you want to get rid of it. So then you search for spiritual things. So I think that's a huge human experience. So Buddha also taught devas and other beings who didn't have much suffering. So were they able to understand the Four Noble Truths when they're in the deva realm, so that they don't have the suffering?
I think you're right that the Noble Truths focus on suffering because that's the thing you want to get liberated from. Yeah, it's not like you can get liberated from the sense of can get liberated from anatta, from non-self, because that is not something you get liberated from non-self. Do you see what I see? So what I'm saying? So yes, I agree. And then you also asked, the devas don't suffer much, but I think from a perspective of a deva, they still suffer much. It's just like different degrees, When very poor people in the world live in very poor circumstances, they have their suffering, and they think, people who are rich and stuff, they must be free from suffering. But then you meet people who are who are rich. Are they free from suffering? No. They just have different kinds of suffering, So the devas will have their kind of sufferings as well. And I think they could very much relate to these kind of teachings as well. Yeah. So that's what I would say.
I wanted to ask about this suffering word again. In past talks, you used the word unsatisfactoriness, and then sometime in the middle of this session you did use that word. But I think I just want to clarify this meaning of the word, because suffering is... does the word mean anything from extreme pain and horribleness to just things which are mildly not very cool?
Not very nice.
It encompasses... I just want to know if that word suffering which you're using is a broad concept that spans all of those things. So it's a kind of a big word.
But it is, it really means pain. And
physical?
Well, also mental pain, just suffering. Sometimes it's translated as unsatisfying, but that is not really what it means. And you have to look at it differently. The Buddha is not, how shall I put this? He's describing things from a different point of view. He's describing things from the view of the noble ones, and especially from the fully enlightened ones. And they look at all these things differently. So you're coming from it from another perspective. You're trying to understand the way you see life. How does that fit into the word dukkha? Yeah, some things are just maybe unsatisfying. You think they're not really suffering, they're just unsatisfying. But from a deeper insight, those things are also suffering. And they are suffering because they are compared to something higher, which is nibbana, the absence of suffering. If you've seen the absence of suffering, then all things that are not nibbana, all things that exist, that are created, and these aspects of existence and so forth, are like painful in comparison. They really like hurt in comparison. So I think suffering is actually a perfect translation, and people should not try to retranslate it just so it fits their views. That's my opinion anyway. So we may have used the word unsatisfying, but I wouldn't myself never translate dukkha as unsatisfying, actually. I think it's a very poor translation myself. Yeah.
I just want to ask another sort of an observation. When you went through the Four Noble Truths, there was the first question was basically saying that life doesn't involve suffering but is suffering, and then you tried to raise that up as a deeper truth. But I just made the observation then that that first truth actually has things behind it, and you know, when we try and understand things, I'm sort of more mathematical, so we start with axioms and we prove things. But even at the first stage here, you're starting with pre-assumptions. So these Four Noble Truths don't really start at the first one and go to the fourth one. They're sort of self-referential. They build into each other, and they can't really be separated in an axiomatic way, and that was the kind of thing that I just realized. I was trying to understand this leads to this, and this leads to this, and the way the Buddha is doing it is a kind of, you're always doing these lists of numbers, but it just doesn't work like that, because the last number comes back to the first number, and the third number goes to the second number. So I just wanted to say that. That's all. You can maybe comment.
I think that's true, and I think that they all belong together, and you can really only understand even as you said, the previous ones in terms of the last one. Even though the last one is the most profound one, it is actually the one who sheds light on the previous ones, and you cannot really understand them independently. At the same time, there is also a progression, because the point of the First Noble Truth, it is also useful as a contemplation for ordinary people as well. And for ordinary people, you will start with those simpler ones, even though in the highest sense they can only be understood in terms of the full insight. They can also be understood in a lesser way, and this is why we approach the Dhamma with saying, just like the Buddha before his awakening, he started saying, illness is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering. He didn't yet have the insight, but he had some kind of grounding in the problem of existence, even though it was a lesser kind of understanding, it still was some kind of understanding. And that's why I think you start with those, then it goes down to the last one, and then the last one reinforces your understanding of the previous ones. So it's kind of a... there's a kind of cyclical reinforcement. What do you call that? Feedback mechanism, which drives it back, and it goes deeper and deeper until you become a stream enter.
Yeah, and it also, you cannot, it comes back to your question about dukkha. Does it mean unsatisfying or does it mean just suffering? It's the same thing with the Four Noble Truths. You cannot really understand the first Noble Truth about suffering without understanding the third Noble Truth about what is the cessation of suffering. So you cannot understand suffering without seeing nibbana, basically, or the absence of suffering, because it changes your perspective on things. Yeah. It's like the fish in the water cannot see what water is. If you're always in suffering, you cannot understand it. You have to get out of suffering for it able to be to understand it. Yeah.
Again, Bhante, the suffering, that last item, that what is it, Sankintena Panchapadana Skandha Dukkha, that one, did Buddha give another detailed analysis of that in a different way, that three types of dukkha, that it is the dukkha dukkha, parinama dukkha, and sankhara dukkha.
Yeah.
So I thought that that classification details that last item, that is in summary, what he said in summary, the 5 grasping aggregates or the personality components, as you put it, Ajahn, that explains that it is the complete dukkha. It is sankhara and the viparinama and the dukkha, physical, and doing is the dukkha and changing is the dukkha. Is that?
I mean, I think it's just another way of classifying, suffering. It can be classified in many different ways, and I think that is one of them. And indeed, that is you can only understand that in terms of the 5 khandhas being suffering, as you say. That's when those 3 kinds of suffering make sense. So dukkha is just the experience of pain. That's what it means, whether mental or physical. Viparinama dukkha is the problem of impermanence, because we are attached to things, even if they're not painful on the physical or mental level. It's painful, actually it becomes painful emotionally, I suppose, because when it changes, then change itself is a problem, regardless of whether you experience it in one way or another because of attachments. And the last one, the sankhara dukkha, well, sankhara in this case, it can be understood in 2 ways. One is understanding that the will is suffering. That's kind of a usual way of sankhara. So any kind of movement of the mind. The question we had before about all wanting is suffering. But I think in this case it means something more profound. It means that all conditioned phenomena, sankhara in the broader sense, are dukkha when compared to the ending of things. This is again why it is so hard to understand. When the Sunyo was on about this, it is a comparative thing. It is compared to other things that something else becomes dukkha. When you see something more profound, it becomes the other thing previously becomes suffering. You go to some kind of cheap, restaurant or whatever. I don't know what is a cheap restaurant, kind of simple food, and then you go to something better, and the previous one suddenly doesn't sound so good anymore as it used to be before, because you have something better. And this is kind of part of the thing, and very often why we hold on to the things that are not so good is because of the sense of self that makes us hold on to those things, because the sense of self is somehow satisfied by the lesser things because of its inherent need to exist and to experience things. Once you let go of that sense of self, then all of these foods start to seem less interesting, and you can let go of the whole caboodle down the track. But I think we have to stop because the meal starts in 3 minutes. We've got to rush over there, quickly go to the toilet, and then... So we'll see you again this afternoon at 12:30. So thanks very much, everyone.